I'm Matthew McCleary.
And I'm Mitchell McCleary.
And this is Movies While They Sleep, the podcast where two brothers watch movies and talk about them after their families have gone to bed. Welcome to today's episode, in which we watched Nomadland. Nomadland is the new movie from director Chloe Zhao, starring Frances McDormand, following a year in the life of a woman who has fallen into a nomadic lifestyle across the American West. If you're interested in watching this movie before you listen to our conversation, you can find it streaming now on Hulu. And now we're going to cut to our conversation that Mitchell and I have already had about Nomadland.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is being able to just be resting in recreation or in yourself and not need it to have any extra meaning beyond that. It doesn't need to be any more meaningful than this is recreation. This is just purely for enjoyment or refreshment or renewal or whatever it is.
It's hard to convince myself of that. I mean, and this could be a good segue into the pod, because, like, it's hard to convince myself of, this book is just going to enrich me personally. That's why I should take time to engage with it and, I don't know, have an activity that doesn't have a necessary means to an end, you know? How I'm connecting that to Nomadland, like, to me, and why I enjoyed the movie is because I was just getting so lonely and so scared of passing away. Not literally death, but like the memory of me or my life or my family, you know? Like that's why it's hard for me to do something or justify recreation in a way that isn't going towards, work.
Producing?
Yeah. Because it's just gone at that point. It's just for me. I don't know. Like a quick example. Like I'm reading that George Saunders book, and I actually love him, and I love his writing, and I love these short stories. But in my head, I'm like, I should be reading a book that has some sort of self-help or practical application to everyday life, because I don't know, that will contribute to more money or more output.
Yes.
I don't know.
I just started reading the other George Saunders, his new book.
What's it called again?
It's called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. And it's a weird book because it's not any of
little
his...
Blade Runner reference. Tears in the rain.
Yeah.
These memories will fade. Right? Something like that?
That is the monologue. That's the Roy Batty monologue.
Which he improv'd, I just learned the other day.
Yes. So I'm reading George Saunders. I started this yesterday, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. And it's a weird book from him, too, because it's not his fiction. There's no fiction of his in it. It's not a novel. It's not his short stories. But it's 7 short stories from kind of the Russian masters in literature, and then he kind of gives his commentary that he's worked out already through teaching at a master's level Russian lit or Russian short stories for 20 plus years, and what his goal is to uncover and teach how to write, how to read, how to be a better reader, and then also really just kind of uncovering what these stories and storytelling in general tells us about life. And I was reading the first story.
So he includes the stories.
He includes the text of the story.
That's great.
And the first story, actually, he even kind of switches up the style or the formula by giving you just a single page of the short story, and then he interrupts it with his commentary and then back to a single page, because he really wants you to get a feel for what it is. And it's this short story from Chekhov called In the Cart. And, it just kind of starts with this school teacher in a small rural town who is in a horse-drawn cart doing what has become just the most routine ride to and from town. And he describes the monotony of this, that even though it is winter just becoming spring, the weather is warm, there's such beauty, she doesn't care because she knows every turn in the road, and it is just utter monotony to her.
It's COVID.
And it is COVID. It is, so much of the routine that we've been living through. But I read that yesterday, and then I watched Nomadland last night, and that was so immediately what I was seeing, even in this film, the kind of routine monotony of these nomads, and the annual pilgrimage to the Amazon camper force warehouse, and it's just the same things over and over and over again. And
Amazon the store.
yes. Yeah, not but and it's funny because the movie is filled with such beauty of the American West. Images of, I mean, just huge expansive vistas of where the lead character goes, and all of that, but so often the characters are caught up in the monotony of getting through the day and getting through their lives, that I think that there's less of, they're not seeing it as much, and there are moments that are significant where characters really get actually observe the beauty that's around them. All that to say, I thought, wow, this was really valuable for me and enriching, that I read this Chekhov story, that I read Saunders' commentary on the story, and now I'm watching this movie and I'm engaging in the movie in a different way than I would have had I not done that. And then my next thought was, yeah, but don't I just sound like a pretentious guy because I read Chekhov this week and I watched a movie? And what use?
Russian literature,
what use is any of that?
Art house movies.
Yeah,
this
Russian
is who
literature,
I am.
art house, anyone? Ugh. And I'm just so repelled by that.
You're like,
because
hey,
I feel guilty
I'm
about
building
it.
myself up into a pretty impressive personality here. I don't know if you have noticed. And it's not even you're reading Russian literature. You're reading commentary on Russian literature.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
That's the
yeah.
next level.
Yeah, it's even better. Well, whatever. It's just, I mean, it sounds stupid. And to what end, and why is it worthwhile? And it's worthwhile because it's enriching. I got to be okay with that. And I think that's where I kind of ultimately come down on.
What about, so moving on just into full-on Nomadland mode, what was enriching about this movie for you? Because I have my Letterboxd score, and I kind of went back and forth. I thought I didn't like it for a while. Like, I can acknowledge the beauty and the acting and some of the feelings, but I was wrestling with, this is very cyclical and feels like the characters don't change and feels like there's no story, and it feels like there was a lot of potential that didn't go somewhere. But then I sat with the movie a bit more today, and I changed my review. So like, when you think about Nomadland, watching that last night, which we both did, what was enriching? What was this movie about for you?
I was really initially captivated by the movie. I was just really taken by it. And for me, I think that is the way that the film builds empathy for these characters, really kind of invites you into that. Part of the power of the movie is that most of the characters are played by real nomads, real people who live this way, basically playing fictionalized versions of themselves.
What's the YouTube guy's name? I don't remember. He felt very, like, I think he might actually be a YouTube star for the.
No, he is.
Yeah, for this nomad life.
Yeah, Bob Wells.
Bob Wells.
And they just played themselves.
Yes.
Frances McDormand plays Fern, and obviously she is not a nomad.
Which great name.
Fern, I know. Yeah. And then David Strathairn plays David, the man that she connects with, and he's the only kind of other professional actor in the film.
Wild.
And there are just these kind of lingering scenes in which these nomads are just telling stories, and I don't know where the lines between reality and fiction are. There's a scene early in the movie in which a friend of Fern's is describing just the loss that she experienced during the economic crisis, 2007, 2008. She was losing her home, I believe, and what she was drawn into was, I'm going to kill myself, and this is how I'm going to do it. And
It was so casual.
and it was so casual, and 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 just kind of, and she obviously didn't do that, and she's found a lot of meaning in the nomad life. But I'm like, I don't know what of that story is fiction or not, and I just find such deep empathy for stories like this and for people like this, and for, I mean, just for people in general. But there's real pain and loss and grief that come from, in the context of this movie, it's the economic crisis of '08. But watching it in the context of COVID, watching it in the context
Yes.
of what's happening right now in the world, and not just that, because there's a lot of that. I mean, where there's a lot of economic anxiety in the country right now, which is really felt in the film. But there's a scene early too where Fern, she lives in her van, and she's gonna stay overnight at like a travel aid or kind of
Gas station.
larger scale gas station kind of a deal. And the manager comes out, and Fern thinks, oh, they're going to kick me off. Hey, no, I asked somebody, they said I could stay here overnight. And the woman says, hey, it's just going to be really cold tonight, and we want to make sure you're taken care of. And Fern says, I'm going to be okay. And she's, puts 5 blankets over her in the back of her van. But I'm watching that in the middle of a week in which, 3/4 of the United States was frozen. And, for a lot of people that's typical, but for a lot of people, especially in Texas, there was huge grief and loss, a literal loss of life, but a lot of pain and anxiety over what was happening this week, whether with the weather and their homes, and just the ability to function, and how fragile that is. That 2 weeks ago, I think most Texans would not have had any concern
Right.
for a cold snap. And then we see the fragility of infrastructure in our country, and people's just we spend our lives kind of trying to build up and protect our homes and our families and these things, and we expect the systems to work, and then when they don't, there's real loss and pain and grief. And
Well, Texas
I think
especially has got their own grid system, which,
Yeah.
hey, big ups to Texas for the freedom side. But yeah, it is wild, the timing of this movie drop. Being about a town in, I forget the town's name,
it's Empire, Nevada.
Empire, Nevada, which was a coal mining town and shut down, and so dispersed all the town's inhabitants to the point where the zip code doesn't exist 6 months later. But
Yeah.
but the fragility of our little ideas about how we live in the world, of like, oh, I live in this city. It's like, oh, that city doesn't exist anymore. It's like, oh, I live in Texas. It's hot here. It's like, oh, this whole place was built not on the idea of snow existing,
Yeah.
and now
Yeah.
just chaos is unleashed. And people, and it's weird watching it in live, like real time, like Insta stories
Yes.
and TikToks of people's roofs caving in.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it's those images of people's ceilings collapsed, and those are the images that really stick with me, because all of the best wisdom of these communities couldn't prepare for this, because this is not something that was going to happen.
Yeah, and I like one of the things as I was watching this movie, and I didn't realize that half or more than half the actors in this thing weren't actual actors, but people who subscribe to this lifestyle, the nomadic lifestyle.
Yeah.
But I was reminded of a Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee episode where Jerry Seinfeld and Sebastian Maniscalco are in a New York deli. And Sebastian lives in LA now, apparently, and Jerry's like, you need to get back to New York. Like, you come on. There's characters in New York. There's textures that you need in the city that feed comedy that's not in LA. And they're in this deli, and he's like, I mean, look at that guy's face. And like it pans to the deli guy. He's like kind of a bigger guy, goofy smile. And he's like, look, you don't get that face in LA. It's like textures, man. You need that. And I kept thinking that during this movie. Is like, oh, the textures of these people these are not LA actors, like really getting deep into the role of these nomads. Like, no, these are the nomads.
Yeah, you can throw method acting out the window. These are just nomads.
Yeah, and that's why when that woman is telling that story about her possible suicide and her making the choice not to do it because she couldn't do that to her dogs. Yeah, there's that discomfort of the bluntness with which this is delivered, the everydayness. You're like, this doesn't feel acted.
Yeah,
these are people's realities.
Yeah,
it's honestly part documentary, this thing.
Oh, and that's I think what was initially, I mean, you asked me the question of what kind of struck me about the film and how it hit me initially, and that I would say is what it was. It was the textures of the people and the stories and the empathy that I was constantly being drawn into throughout. And then and then pretty obviously the beauty of the cinematography.
Yeah.
And
had a bit of a Terrence Malick feel throughout.
I constantly was thinking about The Tree of Life, which is the Terrence Malick film. It's one of my favorite films of all time. And he has this kind of heavy use of just steady cam that kind of wander through homes at the magic hour, and
Blue Hour dominates Nomadland.
Yeah, and that's the color palette of this whole film. And Chloe Zhao, the director of Nomadland, I think does even some of this cinematography and camera work that it kind of evokes Terrence Malick. There's some steady cams lingering, just following Fern through a nomad camp or through a redwood forest or whatever it is. And one of the things that I thought was interesting about this movie is Terrence Malick, when his camera is kind of wandering through nature and examining it, it's because Terrence Malick, the director, and his camera are interested in those things. And he doesn't really care what his characters are doing in those moments. They exist in that place, but they're not interested in what the camera is interested in. Not all the time, but I think in Tree of Life there's a lot of that, especially with the Brad Pitt character. But in this movie, Chloe Zhao is really interested in how Fern is existing and moving in these worlds and these places. That when she is in the California redwoods, that is a different person than when she is walking through the nomad camp, really for the first time in Arizona, and kind of just. You can see in that space she's uncomfortable at first. This is a new place for her, all of these people, and she's learning this lifestyle, and that insecurity is slowly washing away. And then in the redwood forest, there's just awe and curiosity, the majesty, and Fern as a character is really overcome by that. And when she's on the coast of California and the waves are coming and there's all this rain, and she's just overcome by that, and both director and character are just absolutely, the whole film is in awe of this country and the American West.
The tie-in is interesting that George Saunders got brought up earlier, because he talks about this idea in his writing of third-person ventriloquism, which is the third-person narrator whose voice reflects what's going on in the story or the character that they're describing. And so if the third-person narrator is describing a character who's, a little more passive or shy, the description of that character reflects that, and like the voice of the narrator shifts based on that, and it feels like a similar parallel or comparison in this movie of that, the narrator reflecting in those moments of like, okay, we're gonna feel like this for a bit now.
And it's interesting because there's some really clear choices about these things too, that it's not a consistent directorial approach throughout the movie. Is it, you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
totally. Like the
Um,
Amazons or the I'm not sure specifically what it is when she's talking to that woman that says, "Hey, you should probably just retire early."
oh
But
yeah,
the coldness, the
yes,
desaturation, the darkness in those scenes, versus
yeah,
when she's able to reflect and be in awe and actually enjoy nature versus when she's just trying to survive nature and there's
yeah,
constant cold tones and ice
yes,
and things that would lead to death.
yeah, and it's really just, yeah, it works for me throughout. Um, that in any given moment, though there may not be dialogue guiding you, it is not hard to figure out what this character is thinking and feeling, and that's dependent on an incredible central performance, but
Yeah,
also these
she's insane.
directorial.
She's insane.
Yeah, yeah, it's that
Francis.
performance and Chloe Zhao's decisions as a director and how she is shooting this and what she's choosing to include. Really, just all of that really works together. And I think all of that's pretty striking as you see it for the first time. And then the more that I considered the movie, the more that I thought about it today, the more I've grown to really love this one. Um,
Well, yeah, and
and
oh, sorry, finish.
Oh, go ahead. Because I think that sounds like how you were at. You were struck by it just
Yeah,
because of how it's made, and there's a craft here. But it sounds like it's grown in your estimation over the last 24 hours.
yeah. Well, it's funny because I've been doing this new thing where I get up at 5 a.m. To
Yeah.
get some work done before my son gets up at around closer to 7. And so Fridays I watch this movie. We watch this movie after our family goes to bed. Movies while they sleep. Our premise is strong. But come 10:30 and this type of movie's on, I am falling asleep, which I definitely fell asleep during this movie. I'll be honest with you, viewers. I'm not I'm I'm not virtuous in my movie watching always. But what that did do is I rewatched the second half and like rewatched a bit of what I'd already seen, and I was just trying to like get a grasp of what I actually felt about the movie because I started to have a sense of not hatred but disdain for this thing, on but on the second viewing, but also like initially because it kind of reminded me of the loneliness of this year and even
Yes.
outside of this year, but I would there's some specific moments like there's a scene where I think it's the first time she is hanging in the nomad camp and she's
Yeah.
learning about the lifestyle and she's making friends, and then the majority of people pack up and take off and she's kind of the last one there. And in a weird way, it reminded me of like Mexico youth trips back in the day. And it's like, oh, you had this week with these people and they're all sitting in lawn chairs around a campfire and you're like meeting strangers and connecting. And it's like, oh, one by one, everyone kind of fades away, both literally and kind of in your memory. And a lot of the movie for me was about, yeah, that fading memory of a person. And so when that memory's gone, that person's gone forever, you know? And I don't know why it like the reason I ended up giving this movie such a positive review and even now reflecting of okay, this meant something to me is
Yeah.
because it so deeply penetrated that feeling of loneliness and fading that I'm not happy to face or look in the
Wow.
eye, you know?
I love that we're doing this. I love that we're having this conversation because these are not the things that I was thinking about while watching this movie. I was not thinking about the fleeting nature of life, which is there. It's in the movie.
Right.
That is there. The whole central premise is a town that disappeared within 6 months.
Right, like the town disappears, her husband disappears, and she's on the brink of herself, but also, her life. Which, if she talks about should she leave Empire or embrace a more traditional
Yes.
lifestyle, it's in a way choosing to forget the previous life that she lived.
if she the comment she makes, if I leave Empire, it'll be like her husband never existed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so clearly that's in the movie. That was not what I was responding to, resonating with. But I think what I was really moved by, aside from what I shared earlier, I think it really connects with that because she spends the entire movie in a state of grief over the loss of these things. But I think she also spends the entire movie seeking connection and doing so in this very guarded, protective of herself way, where you look at this person and you're like, "Wait, your town went belly up. Your husband has died, and you have stable extended family in the form of your sister and your brother-in-law. Why don't you just move in with them and start over?" But she doesn't want that. She's not interested in that. That would be an easy way for her to find connection and stability and a place and belonging and a place to process her grief, but she rejects that. And I think part of the movie is uncovering why. And then she seeks connection with these people, with the nomads, and it is this funny thing. I mean, that you talk about the rally in Arizona this week or weeks long of them getting together and all the nomads, and then they sit around the fire. I mean, literally, I was having the same thoughts of Mexico mission trips and youth trips.
It's so funny. A guy played guitar at a certain point, and I was like, oh, God, this is...
Yes, I mean, there's like the bro playing guitar with three other dudes off to the side, but then they all sit around the campfire, and they're singing their form of worship songs, which was not a Christian worship song, but it was On the Road Again. Because that's what they're glorying in. That's
their
what
hymn.
They're yes, it's their hymn. They're exalting the road and the lifestyle. And so anyways, what I was saying was the kind of funny thing in the movie is she's seeking connection and finds it in this place, and then they all disappear. They all are disconnected. And then randomly at certain points she'll run into so and so again, she'll run into David again, she'll run into Linda again in Badlands or in Nebraska or wherever, South Dakota, and it's these little fleeting connections that she's seeking. But you're like, well, why don't you go just live with your sister? That's where you could just find this belonging immediately. But there's such a guardedness about it, and she is really unmoored in this movie. I mean, obviously, that's what the nomadic lifestyle is. It is, and just kind of trying to reconcile all these things, her search for connection and rootedness with her just kind of constant rejection of it when it comes.
Yeah. Well, that leads to, I think, what might be both of our favorite characters. And
Yes.
I don't know, she kind of steals the show. What? And I forget her name. It's
Swanky.
Swanky. I want to say Swinky for some reason. But do we want to get into our favorite shots and talk about Swanky a little bit?
Yeah. Why don't you go first?
Yeah. I think that it was... I think it's soon after what we just talked about in Arizona, where the nomadic people or the group come together and then slowly disperse, and we're left with Fern and Swanky left in this camp. And yeah. I'm feeling this heightened loneliness, this heightened everything fades. It's funny. I think I remember as a kid going to a friend's house or a sleepover or whatever fun thing I'm looking forward to, and the first thing I would think when I got there was like, yeah, but this is just gonna end in like 3 hours. Like, it's great right now, but even as like a 10-year-old, I'd be like, in 3 hours this is gonna be a huge bummer. And so we're at that 3 hours where everyone's left and it's her and Swanky, and Swanky, right? I don't know why that
Swanky.
Yeah, the
Swanky.
name just keeps throwing me. I'm like, that can't be her real name.
You thought this movie last week was called No Man's Land.
No Man's Land, Nomad's Land, Nomadlands. I had it all.
Yeah, you got it.
I had all the plurals. I'm like, please, community connection. It's got to be plural. So Swanky's telling her story, and I can't remember the exact order, but eventually Fern is giving her a haircut, and there's just one shot of kind of pulled back of Swanky in the middle of this dirt field sitting in a folding chair while Fern cuts her hair. And for whatever reason, that struck me the most out of every shot in this thing. And part of it is like I just got a haircut like 2 weeks ago. I had long hair for many years, and I just got it cut short, and my barber didn't give me quite what I was looking for, and so I had Sarah clean it up a little bit. And it's pretty vulnerable getting a haircut, especially from your spouse, or like for me, it's because we're in our bathroom and I'm like no shirt on and she's cutting my hair. It looks not good, and I'm like, I feel very vulnerable, and I like this is uncomfortable for me. Like, so for these two that kind of just met, and getting that haircut in this deserted, once communal place, I was like, okay, this feels especially gut punchy right now, of that isolation, that loneliness, that everything fades. The community that you long for is constantly in an ebb and flow that you can never in a stable way hold on to, Like I'm the type of person that wants to death grip community and say we're all here forever, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, reminder, nope.
Yeah. I mean, I love the way you say that. I think the movie gives us this illustration of community that is in constant flux, community and connection that is in constant flux. And the reality is that's what normal, quote unquote, life and community is. People are moving away, transitioning in and out of jobs. It doesn't happen to the frequency and heightened scale of what the nomads experience. But that's what we see in the movie is just kind of this micro version of what connection and community is always like, and we're always seeking, and I love that shot that you described, because it is this picture of everything that is faded around them, and even in their relationship, it's this: they park their vans on opposite ends of this dirt field, and Swanky has a flag, and when the flag's out, it means don't come knocking on my van door because I'm not interested. And Fern needs something. She has a flat tire in a scene near that, and she needs help getting a ride into town to get it all replaced. And she sees the flag out, so she needs the help of her community. But everybody's left. The one person that's left there is saying, "I'm not interested right now," and she really goes through this hesitation moment, and then is apologetic about it. And I think like that's how we feel when we ask each other for help. I don't think that's that different of an experience when any one of us is in crisis and need help. But it's this very amplified picture of it right there in this dirt field in Arizona.
Yeah, like we are, or I know for us, we are happy to offer help, but we're terrified to ask for it because it's more vulnerable to ask for it.
Yeah.
Because when you get to give it, you're the hero.
Yeah.
But when you're asking for it, it's like, oh, I'm gonna open my chest up a little bit and put myself in a place where you could hurt me by saying no.
Yes. Yeah, and we don't want to put ourselves in that vulnerable place.
Yeah.
And that's what Fern is really worried about in that moment, because she needs help.
Right. And she had just seen this, what seemed like, and from what I gathered of watching, it's like, oh, there's something to this community, and then it's dispersed again, and then it just like what she just experienced in her town or her city, and it's like a fast forwarded version of Empire, like reliving itself over and over.
Yes. That's a great point. The way that the town disappears in 6 months is illustrated in the way the nomad camp disappears over hours or days. The Swinky stuff is some of my favorite in the film, but I'll share maybe a different favorite shot. This was also one that really struck me. She has kind of connected with this man David over the course of a couple of different spots and jobs, and he gets out of the nomad lifestyle. His son, his adult son, gets married and has a child, so he's become a grandfather, and that really changes him, and he ends up really settling down with them. And it takes the son.
Despite his absence as a father.
Yes, his own absence with his son. The son still reaches out to dad and says, "Hey, there's an open invitation. You can come home. You could settle. You can lay down some roots." So David does, and Fern is hurt or disappointed when she finds this out. She's there's ambiguity there,
Yeah.
but I
Fern
think
is
there's
never
some
obvious what's
no,
going
no,
on with her.
no, yeah. But I think that's part of her protection.
Yeah.
I think that's part of that character, and so there's some disappointment that this kind of not quite partner in the nomad life is off of it. That he's going home, so to speak, and he's given her an open invitation to come and visit, and so she's making her way out to California to visit, and there's this scene where she goes to the California redwoods, and she's in the middle of the forest, and she is really seems captivated by this massive fallen redwood. And it's been uprooted, laying there in the middle of the forest, and for me it feels like an analogy or metaphor of Fern's life, that she is this uprooted redwood.
Wow.
And she kind of walks the length of it, and
She
and
pales
that
in comparison. It's huge.
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's just and it's beautiful. The whole thing is extraordinarily gorgeous, and so we have this uprooted, fallen redwood, and that's Fern. She is absolutely uprooted. Empire is closed. Her husband is dead, and then she walks from that up to the trunk of a still standing redwood, and almost like hugs this trunk and looks up, and then the camera pans up to this thing that is just hundreds of feet tall and is this extraordinary pillar in this forest,
Flourishing.
and it is so deeply rooted, and it is almost like that's really truly what Fern is longing for, that she is this uprooted tree, and what she's longing for is something sturdy and stable. And then it cuts basically from that to her going to David's family's home and entering into this family where she is warmly accepted, where she is brought in, and she shares a Thanksgiving meal with them. They invite her to live there with them, which is like just
Wild.
wild. Like the lady who lives in her van, just come live with us, we've never met you. And she connects with David again, and his son, and the son's wife, and everyone.
Grandson.
And
She's holding him.
she holds the baby, and she remarks that she and her husband had never had kids, and so she seems visibly physically uncomfortable doing it, but it's all these signs and markers of rootedness. And then she leaves, basically gets up one morning, and I can't handle this
Sneaks
anymore.
out before anyone wakes up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's out, and it's again, and it's part of the cyclical nature of the film, she is kind of dancing on the edge of accepting connection and community.
Right. Like, do you interpret that as the fear of like letting something like that in again, and then inevitable disappointment, or
I mean, I think she
inevitable abandonment or dispersed? Like it, like, do you think a big part of her is running full into the nomadic life because it's the end result and consequence of the uprooting of her normal life? Like, it's the thing she fears.
Yeah, it's this interesting thing I think about the scene with her and her sister when she stays at her sister's house for a couple of days, and the sister said, you were always like this, Fern. As soon as you graduated high school, you got out of town as fast as you could. You married your husband. You moved to Empire, and everybody thought this was crazy. And and Fern kind of says, "Oh, it's the open space that I need. It's the possibility of what's next that was always so attractive." And she talks about the house they had in Empire and the backyard that had a fence that opened up to endless desert to the mountains,
Which is the final shot of the movie,
which is the final,
or one of the final shots of the movie.
Yeah, one of the final sequence of the film. So this is this kind of touchstone for her of it was always the possibility of what's next, the wide open spaces. She doesn't want to be boxed in. That's what she says. And I think part of the film is really saying that. I think those final scenes wouldn't exist if that wasn't true. Because she relives that memory and goes to her old home and walks out the backyard through the open gate into the desert and then gets back in her van and is on the road again. But the kind of twist in all of this is that she lived most of her life in one town, in Empire, with her husband.
Right.
It's not that she really needed those things, because she had the rootedness of this connection in town and community. I think when she found it, that was total satisfaction, total contentment. I mean, the way she talks about the town seems almost quaint. Oh, we had a golf course.
Right.
And
it feels almost like, it almost feels the opposite of what her whole lifestyle up to this point would suggest that she wants. It's
Yes.
boxed in. It sounds cookie cutter almost.
yeah, so they lived in a company track home, she said, nothing special. And maybe part of it is that the fact that they lived on the edge of the neighborhood and that their backyard did open up to the desert was enough for her, and that was enough open space, enough possibility that, you know, she was content and she could stay in it. But she never leaves. She never leaves that town until the town has literally disappeared around her.
Until it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Well, then, coming to the end of this, what was your Letterboxd review, and what's your final say on this thing? If you had to sum it up, what you got out of it, and yeah.
Yeah. My Letterboxd review, this is a 4.5-star movie. I think this is an extraordinary movie. I think what really sets it apart for me, a lot of the elements we've spoken about, you can find these in other movies, but what sets it apart for me is that all of these things, the absolute beauty, the central strong performance, and just the way that it moves through these themes and emotions and ideas, but in all of that, there's no sentimentality in this movie. This is not a sentimental movie.
Right.
This is a melancholy movie. And I think it would be easy to make the movie about nostalgia.
Or even to paint the picture of Fern as a hero figure, and
yes.
like you know, corporate America as a villain.
Yes. There is this. It would be really easy to draw on the nostalgia that people today are feeling when they are drawn into an idea like Make America Great Again. Because this movie is in a lot of ways about, you know, people with economic anxiety and what that draws out. You know, I thought a lot about last year's Netflix documentary American Factory, about a American factory that closed in this Midwestern town and what that did to the community. And it would be really easy for the movie to draw on that, but the movie is clear: Empire is gone and dead and not coming back. And Fern's sister calls the nomads pioneers in the tradition of the great American Western. Right, and the movie is a Western, even though it's in vans and not on horses.
Right.
And the sister says it in a defense of Fern, and Fern kind of bristles at this description, like she's not interested in this.
She's not interested in the glory that idea offers.
Exactly. She's not interested in being a hero. She's not interested in being this pioneering cowboy. She's interested in surviving. The only way she knows how.
Right.
And so there is no sentimentality. There's no nostalgia in the movie about these things. What we get is this kind of unvarnished, raw navigating through so many very, very challenging and complex emotions and themes. I don't remember where I saw this, but somebody had said it's amazing to me that there's a movie this beautiful that still feels like it has dirt underneath its fingernails. And I love that description because I think both those things are held really well together in tension in this movie.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I gave 4.5 too, and everyone that I follow on Letterboxd who reviewed this gave it a 4.5 as well. No one's quite pulling the trigger on the 5.
I do wonder about that, but go ahead.
There's a zeitgeist to it for sure.
Yeah.
Like, all right, I can't give it a 5 if no one else is. But no, I think my barometer for most movies is how much I felt during it, and I think that's why I swayed on this one, is that I felt a lot of, I don't like seeing this because it's just reminded me of my own loneliness or my own humanity, in that I'm not going to be here soon, or the memory of me is not going to be here soon, and I think that they explore that theme, that fading, and make me feel that more richly than any movie I can think of off the top of my head. So yeah, I gave it 4.5 just because of the like reaction it elicited in me of I don't like seeing this, and I'm thinking about my own fears and anxieties more than I'm used to, because I'm pretty good at decompartmentalizing like whether it's violence or I don't know, intense graphic material for a movie, like I can usually hang with most movies and be fine. And some friends or
this hits way too close to home.
Or friends or Sarah or whoever who can't handle a certain level of intensity or violence, or like even horror movies or whatever, because they feel too much, and this ongoing theme with me is that I'm not good at feeling deeply. And so yes, it just got me in a certain headspace that is a testament to it for me, of an instant high rating. I don't know. I feel like that.
Yeah, it evoked in you an extremely strong reaction.
Yes, which
in a way that a lot of movies don't necessarily do.
Right, and I think part of that is it's funny, the things that frustrated me about Malcolm and Marie, our first episode, of this feels too just like a real fight isn't that entertaining to watch, and these characters don't feel like they change, and it's so real that it doesn't work well as a movie that's supposed to go on a journey. And those things that frustrate me about that, I apply to this, and it's the exact reasons why I love this.
Yes, that is funny.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like Fern changes at all. It doesn't feel like there's a before and after, like she conquered something, or she really learned something about herself. But it's more, we got plopped into her world and got to hang out with her for a year and not see a person change, and kind of remind you of how hard it is for you to change.
Yeah.
The poetry was more evident to me, and was felt more. Well, I'll just add, going back to Swanky, I don't know why the thought of her death in this is pretty scary to me. This movie's scarier than a lot of movies that even aim to be scary, in that the commune, the group of nomads, finding out that she had passed away because she had, I think, brain cancer or lung cancer.
Yeah, lung cancer.
Lung cancer. And so she was just living out in her last days, doing what she wanted to do, seeing some wild animals and going kayaking. But hearing that she had passed away, this group, had a campfire, as they do, threw some rocks into the fire pit in remembrance of her, and said, we'll see you down the road, or I don't remember the exact phrase, the kind of catchphrase of the movie. Yeah. But it feels very, and that's it, and that was Swanky, and now she's gone. But that thought and that depiction by people who aren't actors who live this life
Yeah.
was pretty scary to me.
Yeah.
Like, this can't be it, right?
But I also had the thought too of what a miracle that they even know of or found out that she died.
Right. Right. Like, it just had me thinking about how many people's existence on this planet come and go without being
Yes.
noticed.
And that is real. That's life.
Yeah. Last thing I'll touch on for this movie, there's got to be some sort of cinematic universe between this and Fargo, because one of the opening scenes, Fern goes to pee in the middle of a field, and the shot, she pees by a wire, like a wired fence. What's that called with the spikes?
Like a barbed
Barbed
wire
wire,
fence.
and yeah, barbed.
Right off a highway.
Yeah, but the angle of it and the snow in the far background, it hasn't hit yet, but it's coming. You can tell. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is where they buried the money in Fargo. Simple as that. It's the exact same shot, same actor. I'm like, the parallels have to be drawn, in my opinion, in this humble reviewer's opinion. Well, I think that pretty much covers Nomadland. Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Movies While They Sleep. You can follow us on Instagram at Movies While They Sleep and Twitter at MWTSPod.
Be sure to subscribe to the pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever you listen to your podcasts on. And be sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That helps boost the visibility of our podcast as people are searching for stuff, especially movie pods.
And we need
So
the
I think this
boost.
was-
We need the
yes,
boost.
I think this was a good episode. It was a movie we both loved, I think. And I think a good conversation.
Yep. And next week's episode, we will be watching I Care a Lot, which is streaming on Netflix.
I'm excited about this one. It looks a little more, let's say, irreverent than Nomadland.
And I want to make sure to shout out our intro music was recorded by Andy Carhall, which is a good friend of mine. And he is an amazing singer-songwriter, musician, all of the above. You can find him on Instagram at Carhall. That's CARRHALL. And yeah, he makes and records music for podcasts, video games, movies, and he's just a killer singer-songwriter. So make sure to check him out.
Andy, I love the music. It's great.
It's perfection. We love it.
Hey, thank you guys for joining us this week on Movies While They Sleep. We will catch you next week for I Care a Lot.
And we do. Goodbye, listeners.
Bye.
Boom.